The stars did not warn anyone. They never do. Far beyond the edge of human space, a fleet of alien warships moved silently through the black. There were 300 ships in total. Each one was longer than 10 football fields. Their metal skin was dark gray, almost invisible against the void. They moved in perfect formation like a school of predator fish hunting in deep water. At the front of this fleet was the flagship, a massive vessel called the Draveth Ascendant. Inside its command bridge stood Commander Vel Threxer, leader of the Threxy Empire's 7th Invasion Fleet. He was tall, with gray skin and dark red eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light of the bridge. He looked down at the holographic map in front of him, watching hundreds of small blue dots representing human colonies and space stations. Finally, Vel said, his voice deep and confident. The primitive ones. Behind him, his second-in-command, an officer named Sarah Void, stepped forward. She was younger, sharper, but always careful with her words. "Commander, our scans confirm it," she said. "This is human space. Population estimates are in the billions. Military presence is minimal." Vel smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Minimal, just as the old report said. 40 years ago, before Vel was even a soldier, Threxy scout ships had entered this region briefly. They collected data, took a few readings, and left. Back then, humans were still fighting each other in small wars on their homeworld. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were weak. Their technology was, by alien standards, almost embarrassing. That old data became legend among the Threxy military. Humans were seen as a curiosity, not a threat. A species that fought itself instead of growing stronger. A civilization stuck in its own infancy. "They have had 40 years to grow," Sarah said carefully. "Is it possible they have changed?" Vel laughed, a low rumbling sound. "Look at the numbers, Sarah. Their fleet size has barely increased. Their ship designs are almost identical to what we scanned decades ago. If anything, they have grown lazy, comfortable, weak." He was not wrong to trust the numbers. The numbers were real. But numbers only show what someone allows you to see. "Send the message," Vel ordered. "Standard protocol. Give them the chance to surrender. It is and more efficient than a full assault, and it will look good in the historical records. The Threxy Empire believes in mercy after all." Sarah nodded and turned to her console. Within moments, a message was broadcast across every human frequency the Threxy could detect. It was translated instantly by their language decoding systems, learned from decades-old recordings. The message was simple. "This is Commander Vel Threxer of the Threxy Empire. Your territory now belongs to us. Surrender immediately and your people will be treated with mercy. Resist and you will be erased. You have 1 hour to respond." The message traveled through the dark for several long minutes before reaching the nearest human outpost, a modest research and defense station called Meridian Point. Inside Meridian Point, the mood was calm. Too calm by Threxy standards, if any of them could have seen it. A young communications officer named Daniel Reyes sat at his station, reading the alien message on his screen. He did not gasp. He did not call for panic. He simply raised an eyebrow, turned to his supervisor, and said, "Sir, we've got visitors." His supervisor, an older woman named Commander Elena Osei, walked over and read the message herself. She crossed her arms and let out a small breath, almost like a sigh, but not quite. 300 ships, she said, looking at the sensor readings. "That's a lot of ships for a species they think is weak." "Orders, Commander?" Daniel asked. Elena thought for a moment. Then she smiled just slightly. "Send the standard response." Daniel typed quickly, and a moment later, a return message shot back across the void toward the Threxy fleet. On the bridge of the Draveth Ascendant, Vel Threxer waited for the response with mild amusement. He expected fear. He expected pleading. He expected humans to beg for mercy, the way so many other primitive species had done before them. The message arrived. Sarah read it aloud, her voice hesitant. "This is Meridian Point Defense Station. Message received. We do not accept the terms. Please proceed at your own risk." The bridge went quiet. Vel blinked. "Read that again." Sarah repeated it, word for word. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Vel laughed, a loud, booming laugh that echoed across the bridge. "They refuse? A single defense station refusing an entire invasion fleet?" He shook his head. "Foolish, or perhaps brave. It does not matter. Bravery does not stop plasma cannons." "Commander," Sarah said slowly, "should we be concerned? Such confidence from such a small station. Concerned?" Vel turned to her, his red eyes narrowing slightly. "Sarah, I understand your caution. It is part of what makes you a good officer. But look at their ships. Look at their weapons. Nothing has changed. Confidence without power is simply foolishness." He gestured to the fleet formation on the display. "Advance the fleet. We take Meridian Point first. Let it serve as an example to the rest of their pathetic colonies." The Threxy fleet moved forward, closing the distance to Meridian Point. As they approached, their sensors picked up something odd. There were no fighter squadrons scrambling to meet them, no emergency evacuation signals, no frantic distress calls to nearby colonies, just silence. Sarah frowned at her console. "Commander, the station isn't responding to further hails. No visible defense preparations. It's almost like they are..." "Ignoring us?" Vel offered. "Waiting," Sarah said. Something about that word made Vel pause just for a second, but he shook it off. Weakness came in many forms, and perhaps this was simply another. Paralysis. Denial. Some species froze when faced with overwhelming force. It was not unusual. "Bring the fleet within firing range," Vel ordered. "Target the station's primary reactor core. One clean strike should be enough to demonstrate our power." The fleet obeyed. Ships adjusted their positions, cannons charging with deep blue energy. On the bridge, weapons officers counted down the final seconds before firing range was achieved. And then, something strange happened. The lead attack ship, a smaller vessel called the Kravik, suddenly lost contact. "Commander," a weapons officer called out. "The Kravik has gone dark. No response on any channel." Vel's smile faded slightly. "Debris? Malfunction?" "Unknown, sir. Sensors show the ship intact, but unresponsive. Life signs still present on board, but no system activity at all." Sarah checked her own console. Her eyes widened. "Commander, 2 more ships just went dark. The Farron and the Korvask, same pattern, no damage, no explosion, just silence." The bridge grew tense. Vel stepped closer to the main display, watching as 3 of his ships blinked from active status to unknown status, still floating in space but completely unresponsive. "Some kind of weapon?" Sarah asked. "An EMP burst, maybe?" "Impossible," Vel muttered. "Our shields would have blocked any electromagnetic attack of that scale. There was no visible energy discharge, no detected weapons fire." He turned to his tactical officer. "Options?" "We could retreat and reassess," the officer suggested. Vel's jaw tightened. Retreat? From a single defense station after losing only 3 ships out of 300? It would be humiliating. It would look weak in front of his crew, weak in front of the Empire. "No," Vel said firmly. "We continue the advance. Whatever caused this, it is limited. Perhaps some outdated defense system left over from their old wars. We have 297 ships remaining, more than enough." He did not know in that moment that he had just made the first of several fatal mistakes. As the fleet pushed closer to Meridian Point, more strange things began to happen. Sensor readings flickered unpredictably. Communication systems experienced brief bursts of static, as if someone, somewhere, was testing the fleet's defenses without actually attacking them. Then finally, Meridian Point's true nature revealed itself, just slightly. A single message appeared on every Threxy ship's console simultaneously, overriding their communication systems entirely, something that should have been technologically impossible for a species with minimal capability. The message was short. "You should not have come here." Vel stared at the words, his confidence cracking just slightly, though he refused to let it show on his face. "Who sent this? Trace it." Unable to trace, Commander, Sarah said, her voice tight. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, like it was broadcast directly into our own systems. For the first time since the invasion began, Vel Threxur felt something unfamiliar creeping into his mind. Not fear exactly, something closer to doubt. He looked out at the vast darkness of space ahead, toward the small, seemingly harmless defense station that had, in the span of a few minutes, disabled 3 of his ships and hacked directly into his fleet's communication network without firing a single visible shot. The old reports had said humans were primitive, weak, stuck in their own infancy, fighting themselves instead of growing. But those reports were 40 years old. And in 40 years, humanity had not been sleeping. Back on Meridian Point, Commander Elena Ose watched the alien fleets approach on her main screen. Her expression calm and unreadable. Daniel Reyes stood beside her, glancing nervously between the screen and his commanding officer. "They're still coming," he said. "Should we prepare full defensive measures?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Not yet. Let them get a little closer. Let them feel confident." "Confident?" Daniel repeated. "Commander, with respect, they've got 297 warships still active. We've got 1 station." Elena allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "Daniel, this station was never meant to fight them alone. It was meant to buy time, to learn, and to send a message." She glanced at the disabled alien ships drifting silently in space, their crews trapped inside, confused and helpless. "We just sent that message." "And what message is that?" Daniel asked. Elena's eyes moved to the vast alien fleet still advancing through the darkness, unaware of just how much humanity had changed since those old scout ships collected their outdated data decades ago. "That we were never the weak ones," she said quietly. "We were simply waiting." Far above the station, deep within the shadows of nearby asteroid fields and hidden behind cloaking fields that Threxy sensors could not detect, dozens of human warships sat in complete silence, engines cold, weapons ready. They had been there for hours, watching, waiting for exactly this moment. The Threxy fleet had no idea they were not simply facing one defense station. They were flying directly into a trap that had been prepared for years, and Commander Vel Threxur, still confident despite the strange, unexplainable losses his fleet had already suffered, continued to advance his ships forward, completely unaware that he was leading his entire invasion fleet toward its final, devastating mistake. On the bridge of the Draveth Ascendant as the fleet closed the final distance to Meridian Point, Vel turned to Sarah one last time. "Something is wrong," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They are not afraid." Sarah said nothing. She simply stared at the screen, at the silent station ahead, and at the darkness surrounding it, a darkness that suddenly felt much less empty than before. The Draveth Ascendant pushed forward through the dark, leading the remaining 297 ships of the Threxy invasion fleet toward Meridian Point. Commander Vel Threxur stood at the center of his bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, trying to look calm. But inside, doubt had begun to grow, small and quiet, like a crack in old glass. 3 ships gone, no explosions, no visible attack, just silence, and that strange message, appearing on every screen at once. "You should not have come here." Vel pushed the thought aside. He was a commander of the Threxy Empire, chosen to lead the 7th Invasion Fleet because of his discipline and his record of victories. He would not let a single defense station and a few tricks shake his confidence. "Status report," he said. Sarah Void, his second in command, checked her console. "Fleet formation is stable, Commander. 297 ships active. We are 3 minutes from firing range on Meridian Point." "Good," Vel said. "Order the fleet to spread into attack formation. I want overwhelming force the moment we are in range." Across the fleet, ships began to shift positions, forming a wide net around the small station ahead. To any outside observer, it would have looked like a group of wolves surrounding a single helpless rabbit. But Elena Ose, commander of Meridian Point, was not a rabbit. And she was not alone. Deep in the shadow of a nearby asteroid field, 36 human warships sat in complete darkness, engines cold, weapon systems on standby. Their hulls were coated with an experimental material that absorbed most scanning frequencies, making them nearly invisible to Threxy sensors. This was Task Force Sentinel, humanity's best-kept secret, built over the last 2 decades in near-total silence. Inside the flagship of this hidden fleet, the Resolute, Admiral James Okafor watched the Threxy fleet's approach on a tactical display. Beside him stood his tactical officer, Lieutenant Mira Chen, young but sharp, her eyes fixed on the same screen. "They're falling right into the pattern we predicted," Mira said quietly. "As expected," James replied. "Overconfidence is the oldest weakness in the universe. They still think we're the same species their scouts saw 40 years ago." "Should we move to support Meridian Point now?" James shook his head. "Not yet. Elena knows what she's doing. Let the station handle the first wave. We need the Threxy fully committed before we reveal ourselves. If we jump in too early, they might retreat and warn their empire. We need this to be complete. A message that cannot be ignored." Mira nodded, though her hands remained tense on her console. Waiting was always the hardest part of war. Back on the Draveth Ascendant, the Threxy fleet reached firing range. Vel Threxor raised his hand, ready to give the order to attack. "Commander," Sarah said suddenly, "sensor readings from Meridian Point are strange." "Strange how?" "The station's shields are active, but they are absorbing far more energy than our scans predicted possible for their technology level. And there's something else. Small objects, possibly automated drones, deploying from the station's surface. Hundreds of them." Vel frowned, watching the display as dozens of small silver shapes emerged from Meridian Point, spreading out in a wide defensive pattern. "Drones," he said dismissively. "Simple automated defense systems. Nothing our weapons cannot handle. Fire at will. Target the station's shield generators first." The Threxy fleet unleashed its first wave of attacks. Blue plasma bolts streaked through space, dozens of them converging on Meridian Point's shields. The station's energy barrier flared brightly, absorbing the impact, but it held. "Shields at 91%, Sarah reported, reading data from her own scans. "Their defense grid is up more advanced than we anticipated." "Continue firing," Vel ordered, his patience thinning. "No shield can hold forever." The bombardment continued. Wave after wave of plasma fire slammed into Meridian Point's shields. Slowly, steadily, the station's energy barrier began to weaken. 70%, 60%, 40%. Vel allowed himself a small smile. This, at least, was familiar. This was how battles were supposed to go. Overwhelming force breaking down primitive defenses, exactly as history had shown time and time again. "Shields at 20%, Sarah announced. "At this rate, full shield collapse in approximately 90 seconds. "Then we will have our victory in 90 seconds, Vel said. "Prepare boarding parties. Once the shields fall, we take the station intact. I want prisoners for interrogation, not a burning wreck." But as the countdown continued, something unexpected happened. The small silver drones that had deployed from Meridian Point, previously scattered in a passive defensive formation, suddenly began to move. Instead of attacking the incoming fire, they moved toward the Threxy ships, weaving through the battlefield with impossible speed and precision. "Commander, the drones are changing behavior," Sarah said, alarm creeping into her voice. "They're not attacking the station's shields for support. They're heading directly for our ships." "Let them come," Vel said. "Point defense systems will handle a few drones easily." The Threxy ships activated their close-range defense weapons, small rapid-fire cannons designed to shoot down incoming projectiles and small craft. But as the drones approached, something strange happened. The point defense systems seemed to struggle, their targeting computers unable to lock onto the fast-moving, erratically weaving drones. "Weapons systems reporting targeting failures," a weapons officer called out. "The drones are adapting to our defense patterns in real time." Vel's confidence wavered slightly. "Adapting? That is not possible for simple automated drones." But it was happening. One by one, the silver drones reached their targets, attaching themselves to the hulls of several Threxy ships. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, across the fleet, ship after ship began losing power. Not exploding, not being destroyed, simply shutting down. Exactly like the 3 ships lost earlier near Meridian Point. "Report," Vel demanded. 7 more ships have gone dark, Sarah said, her voice tight with growing alarm. Same pattern as before. Systems offline, but no hull damage, no casualties detected. It's as if something is disabling them from the inside. Vel stared at the tactical display, watching more and more of his ships blink from active to unknown status. 10 ships. 15. The drones continued their work, moving with calm, methodical precision, as if this entire battle had already been planned out in perfect detail, long before the Threxy fleet ever arrived. "This is not primitive technology," Sarah said quietly. "Commander, I don't think we understand what we are actually facing." Vel said nothing for a long moment, watching the chaos unfold across his fleet's tactical display. 20 ships now disabled. His confident smile from earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by a tight, controlled expression that barely hid the growing unease underneath. "Concentrate fire on the drones," he finally ordered. "Destroy them before they reach more ships." The remaining Threxy ships adjusted their weapons, trying to target the small silver drones directly. A few were destroyed in bright flashes of light. But for every drone destroyed, several more seemed to slip through, reaching their targets and disabling more ships. On the Resolute, Admiral James Okafor watched the battle unfold with quiet satisfaction. "Their formation is breaking down," Mira reported. 23 ships disabled so far. The rest of the fleet is starting to panic, though they're trying not to show it. "Good," James said. "Let them struggle a little longer. We want them fully committed, fully confused, before Meridian Point delivers the final piece of the plan." Back on Meridian Point, Elna Ose watched the same battle from her own command center, a small, tired smile crossing her face. "Daniel, status on the shield." "Down to 8%, Commander," Daniel Reyes replied, "but that's exactly where we wanted it." "Good. Prepare the final sequence." Daniel's hands moved quickly over his console, inputting a long series of commands. Across the station, hidden systems that had remained completely dormant throughout the entire battle began to activate. Systems that no scan, no sensor, no old scout report could have ever detected, because they had been built and installed only in the last 10 years. In complete secrecy, back on the Threxy flagship, Vel Threxer watched his fleet's situation grow steadily worse. 28 ships now disabled. The remaining ships were struggling to maintain formation, weapons fire growing increasingly disorganized as confusion spread through the ranks. "Commander," Sarah said, her voice unusually strained, "I'm detecting massive energy buildup from Meridian Point's core systems. This isn't shield energy. This is something else entirely." Vel's red eyes narrowed. "Define something else." "I don't know, sir. The energy signature doesn't match anything in our records. It's unfamiliar." Before Vel could respond, alarms began blaring across the Draveth Ascendant's bridge. "Multiple contacts detected," a sensor officer shouted, "emerging from the asteroid field bearing 327. Every eye on the bridge turned to the main display as 36 human warships decloaked from their hidden position, engines flaring to life, weapons systems fully charged and ready. Task Force Sentinel had revealed itself. Exactly at the moment the Threxy fleet was already in chaos and disarray. Vel stared at the display in stunned silence. 36 additional warships, larger and more advanced than anything his scans had predicted humans capable of building. Ships that had been sitting silently, invisible, watching his entire fleet's approach without ever being detected. "That is impossible," Vel said quietly. "Our sensors detected nothing. Nothing at all." "Commander," Sarah said, her voice now openly shaking, "I don't think the old reports were simply outdated. I think they were never accurate to begin with. I think humanity has been hiding their true capabilities for decades, waiting for exactly this moment." Vel's mind raced, trying to process the situation unfolding before him. His fleet, once a symbol of overwhelming, unstoppable force, was now caught between a station that had disabled dozens of his ships without firing a single lethal shot, and a hidden fleet of advanced warships that had appeared from nowhere, perfectly timed to catch him at his most vulnerable moment. "All ships," Vel said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Prepare for full retreat. We need to regroup and reassess." "Commander," Sarah interrupted, "the newly arrived human ships are moving to cut off our retreat vectors. They're positioning to completely surround our fleet." Vel watched, helpless, as the 36 human warships spread out with terrifying precision, moving into position around the remaining Threxy fleet like the closing jaws of some massive, invisible trap. Every possible retreat route was being systematically closed off, one by one. "This was never a simple defense," Vel said slowly, the full weight of the realization settling over him. "This was a trap, an elaborate, carefully planned trap, and we walked right into the center of it." Sarah said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The confident, overwhelming invasion fleet that had entered human space just hours earlier, expecting an easy victory over a primitive species, now found itself surrounded, confused, and rapidly losing ships to technology it did not understand and could not counter. On the tactical display, the remaining active Threxy ships, now numbering just over 250, found themselves completely encircled. Meridian Point ahead of them, its shields nearly depleted, but its hidden systems fully charged. Task Force Sentinel's 36 advanced warships closing in from behind and the sides, weapon systems glowing bright with barely contained power, and somewhere in the darkness beyond even Task Force Sentinel's position, though the Threxy fleet did not yet know it, additional human forces were already moving into position, completing a plan that had been years in the making. Vel Threxer stood on his bridge, staring at the tactical display, watching his once unstoppable invasion fleet transform, piece by piece, into a trapped and desperate group of ships with nowhere left to run. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice now carrying none of the confidence it had held just hours earlier. "Send a message to the Empire. Tell them." He never finished the sentence. At that exact moment, every screen across the entire Threxy fleet flickered once, and the same message from before appeared again, this time accompanied by something new. A live visual feed showing Meridian Point's defenses fully charging, and Task Force Sentinel's ships closing the final gaps in their formation. "You should not have come here. Last chance to surrender." Vel stared at the message, his mind racing through every possible option, every possible strategy that might save what remained of his fleet. But as he looked at the tactical display, surrounded on all sides, ships failing one by one, facing an enemy whose true capabilities remained almost completely unknown to him, one horrifying realization settled deep into his mind. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Vel Threxer understood, with absolute certainty, that he was not the hunter in this battle. He and his entire fleet had become the prey. Silence filled the bridge of the Draveth Ascendant. On every screen the same message glowed in cold, steady light. "You should not have come here. Last chance to surrender." Commander Vel Threxor stared at the words for a long moment. Around him, over 250 ships of what had once been the mighty 7th Invasion Fleet sat trapped, surrounded, confused. 30 more had gone dark in the last few minutes alone, their systems disabled by drones that moved faster and smarter than anything Threxy engineers had ever built. "Commander," Sarah Void said quietly. "Orders?" Vel's mind raced. Surrender was unthinkable. The Threxy Empire did not surrender to lesser species. It never had, not in 300 years of conquest. But looking at the tactical display, at the human warships closing in from every direction, at his own fleet crumbling ship by ship without even a proper battle to show for it, Vel understood something terrible. This was not going to be a battle. This was going to be a slaughter, unless he made a decision, and made it fast. "All ships," Vel said, his voice sharp and commanding despite the fear building beneath it. "Full offensive. Target the human fleet directly. We break through their formation and retreat to open space. Now." The order spread across the fleet instantly. What remained of the Threxy ships, over 200 vessels, turned their weapons toward Task Force Sentinel's 36 warships, unleashing a massive wave of blue plasma fire in a desperate attempt to punch a hole through the human formation. On the Resolute, Admiral James Okafor watched the incoming wave of fire with calm, practiced eyes. "Here it comes," he said. "Mira, status on the deflection grid?" "Fully charged, Admiral," Lieutenant Mira Chen replied. "Ready on your command." "Activate." Across all 36 human warships, a new kind of technology came online, something the Threxy had never encountered before. Instead of simple energy shields that absorbed incoming fire, human ships projected localized gravity distortions, bending the path of incoming plasma bolts just enough to send them curving harmlessly off into empty space. The Threxy's entire opening barrage, hundreds of plasma bolts fired with desperate precision, missed their targets entirely, sailing past the human fleet and disappearing into the darkness beyond. On the Draveth Ascendant, Sarah stared at her console in disbelief. "Commander, our attack, it completely missed. All of it. Every single shot." "That is not possible," Vel said, his voice barely a whisper now. "No defense system can redirect that much simultaneous firepower." "They're not blocking our shots, Commander," Sarah said, horror creeping into her voice as she studied the sensor data. "They're bending space itself around their ships. This is technology decades beyond anything in Threxy records." Vel felt something he had never truly felt before in his long military career. Absolute, undeniable dread. Aboard the Resolute, James Okafor gave his next order calmly, without any trace of triumph or cruelty in his voice. "Return fire. Precision strikes only. Target their weapons and engine systems. Minimize casualties where possible." "Minimize casualties, Admiral?" Mira asked, glancing at him. "They just tried to break through our formation with a full offensive." "They're frightened and desperate," James said. "We don't need to destroy them to win this battle. We need to make sure they understand completely and permanently that attacking humanity was the worst mistake their empire has ever made. A message is more powerful than a massacre." The human fleet opened fire, and unlike the chaotic, overwhelming barrage from the Threxy ships, their attack was precise, almost surgical. Bright beams of focused energy shot across the battlefield, striking exact locations on each targeted Threxy ship. Weapon systems, engine cores, communication arrays. Ship after ship in the Threxy fleet found its weapons suddenly destroyed, its engines disabled, its ability to fight or flee completely removed, all without a single hull breach, without a single life lost. It was warfare unlike anything the Threxy had ever witnessed, terrifyingly efficient and almost mechanically calm. "Commander," Sarah said, watching the destruction unfold across the tactical display, "we are being systematically dismantled. Not destroyed. Dismantled. They are removing our ability to fight ship by ship with almost surgical precision." Vel watched, helpless as one Threxy vessel after another went silent, drifting powerless in space. Weapons gone, engines dead, crews alive but completely unable to continue the fight. It was, in some strange and horrifying way, worse than simple destruction. It was total humiliating defeat, delivered with calm and deliberate control. "They could destroy us completely," Vel said quietly, almost to himself. "They have the power to end this fleet entirely, and they are choosing not to." "Why?" Sarah asked. Vel had no answer. For the first time in his life, he genuinely did not understand the enemy standing before him. Meanwhile, at Meridian Point, Elena Ose watched the battle's progress with quiet focus. "Daniel, casualty reports from the Threxy fleet?" "Minimal, Commander," Daniel Reyes replied, checking the data streaming in from Task Force Sentinel. "Admiral Okafor's forces are sticking to the plan, disabling ships, not destroying them. A few hundred injuries reported across the fleet, but very few confirmed deaths." Elena nodded, satisfied. "Good. That's exactly what we need." A defeated enemy who survives to tell the story is far more valuable than one who dies and becomes a martyr for their empire's next invasion attempt. Should we move to secure Meridian Point's own defenses now? Daniel asked. The station's shields are almost fully depleted. Full power to the final defense measure, Elena ordered. It's time to close this properly. Deep within Meridian Point's core systems, the mysterious hidden technology Elena had activated earlier finally reached full charge. A massive, invisible field of energy expanded outward from the station, enveloping the entire battlefield in a strange, shimmering distortion that bent and twisted the light around it. On the Draveth Ascendant's bridge, alarms blared as sensors detected the sudden change. "Commander, Meridian Point has activated something enormous," Sarah reported, her voice tense. "Energy readings are off every scale we have. I don't know what this is." Vel stared at the display, watching as the strange field spread across the entire battlefield, encompassing his fleet, Task Force Sentinel, and Meridian Point itself, all within its shimmering boundary. "Report on our systems," Vel demanded. "Weapon systems, completely offline, Commander," a weapons officer called out, panic evident in his voice. "Engine systems reduced to minimal power. Life support remains stable, but everything else is being suppressed." Vel looked around his bridge, watching his crew's confusion and fear grow with every passing second. Whatever this new field was, it had accomplished in seconds what hours of battle had only partially achieved. It had completely neutralized every remaining Threxy ship's ability to fight or flee. "Impossible," Vel whispered. "No single field could suppress an entire fleet system simultaneously." "Commander," Sarah interrupted, her voice suddenly quiet and strange. "I'm receiving a direct transmission. From Meridian Point, audio only. It's Commander Osei herself." "Put it through," Vel said. A moment later, Elena Osei's calm, steady voice filled the bridge of the Draveth Ascendant. "Commander Vel Threxer," Elena began, "your fleet is currently disabled and completely surrounded. You have lost 63 ships to system failures caused by our drone technology. The remaining 237 ships in your fleet now have their weapons, engines, and offensive systems completely suppressed by Meridian Point's containment field. You are not able to fight. You are not able to flee." Vel's hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, but he said nothing, listening to every word. 40 years ago, Elena continued, your scouts observed a species still fighting itself, still discovering what it could become. You saw weakness because that is what we allowed you to see. What you did not see was everything that came after, the alliances we built, the technology we developed, the patience we practiced, waiting for exactly this moment, when your empire would grow arrogant enough to try what you have just attempted. You could have simply defended your territory, Vel said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Instead, you built an elaborate trap. We built a lesson, Elena corrected calmly. One that your empire needed to learn before more lives on both sides were lost in future conflicts. You came here expecting an easy victory over a primitive species. We intend for you to leave with a very different understanding of exactly what humanity has become. Vel stood in silence, staring at the tactical display showing his entire fleet, powerless and surrounded, completely at the mercy of the very species his empire had dismissed as weak and insignificant for decades. What happens now? He finally asked, the words difficult to speak aloud. Now, Elena said, you are given a choice, full surrender, and safe passage home for your surviving crews once we've confirmed your fleet poses no further threat. Or continued resistance, in which case Admiral Okafor's forces will be forced to escalate their response beyond simple disabling strikes. Vel looked around his bridge one final time, at Sarah's tense, frightened expression, at the rest of his crew, silently waiting for his decision, their fates entirely in his hands. Every instinct within him, every ounce of pride built over decades of military service and a lifetime of Threxy conquest, screamed at him to refuse, to fight until the very end rather than accept such total humiliating defeat. But looking at the numbers, at the impossible technology surrounding his fleet, at the calm, controlled precision with which humanity had dismantled his invasion without a single unnecessary death, Vel understood, with absolute clarity, that continued resistance would accomplish nothing except the pointless deaths of everyone under his command. "Sarah," he said quietly, "signal full surrender to all remaining ships." Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly, relief evident despite the shame of the moment. "Yes, Commander." As the surrender signal spread across the remaining Threxy fleet, ship by ship powering down their already suppressed weapon systems completely, Elena Osei's voice returned one final time. "A wise decision, Commander Threxer. Prepare your crews for evacuation procedures. Your ships will not be returning to Threxy space." Vel's eyes widened slightly. "Our ships? Your fleet's technology, weapons, and vessels will be studied, dismantled, and repurposed," Elena explained. "This is the price of an unprovoked invasion. However, your crews, every single one of them, will be given safe passage home aboard lifeboats, fully supplied and completely unharmed." "You intend to strip us of our entire fleet," Vel said slowly, "and send us home with nothing but lifeboats." "Yes," Elena confirmed. "We want your empire to remember this day clearly, not through the deaths of your soldiers, but through the return of your commanders, alive, humbled, and carrying a very important message back to your leadership." Vel closed his eyes for a long moment, processing the full weight of what was happening. His fleet, once the pride of the Threxy 7th Invasion Force, would be completely dismantled. His crews would return home not as conquering heroes, but as survivors of a battle they had entered with absolute confidence and left with absolutely nothing. "What message?" Vel finally asked. There was a brief pause before Elena Osei's voice returned, calm, steady, and carrying an unmistakable weight of quiet, controlled power. "That humanity was never the weak, primitive species your empire remembered. That we have grown, prepared, and waited patiently for exactly this moment. And that any future invasion attempt will meet an even more decisive response than the one your fleet is experiencing today." As Elena's words settled across the bridge of the Draveth Ascendant, Vel Threxer looked out at the vast darkness of space surrounding his defeated fleet, at the small, unassuming defense station that had, in a matter of hours, completely dismantled an invasion force his empire had believed unstoppable. For the first time in his long, proud military career, Commander Vel Threxer understood, with absolute and humbling certainty, the true cost of underestimating an enemy. And somewhere far beyond the edge of human space, the Threxy Empire's leadership remained completely unaware that their 7th invasion fleet, sent with full confidence toward an easy conquest, was about to return home carrying nothing but lifeboats, and a message that would change the course of their empire's future forever. The surrender was complete. Across the battlefield, 237 Threxy warships sat powerless and silent, trapped inside Meridian Point's containment field like insects caught in an invisible web. What had once been the proud 7th invasion fleet of the Threxy Empire now drifted helplessly in human space, waiting for whatever came next. On the bridge of the Draveth Ascendant, Commander Vel Threxer stood in silence, watching the final stages of his fleet's surrender unfold on the tactical display. The shame of it settled deep into his chest, heavier than any wound he had ever taken in battle. "Commander," Sarah Void said quietly, "Admiral Okafor's forces are moving into position. They're preparing to begin the evacuation process." Vel nodded slowly, saying nothing. There was nothing left to say. Aboard the Resolute, Admiral James Okafor watched the same display with a calm, measured expression. Beside him, Lieutenant Mira Chen studied the scene with something close to disbelief. "I still can't quite believe it worked exactly as planned," Mira admitted. 300 ships reduced to lifeboats without a single Threxy casualty. "That was always the goal," James said. "Winning a battle is easy when you have overwhelming force. Winning a war, a real lasting peace, requires something more. It requires the enemy to understand exactly why they lost, without giving them a reason to seek revenge through hatred alone." "You think they'll actually learn from this?" Mira asked. "Or will their empire just come back with a bigger fleet next time?" James considered the question carefully before answering. "That depends entirely on what kind of story their survivors tell when they return home. A story of humiliating defeat and slaughtered soldiers breeds only anger and revenge, a story of overwhelming defeat but combined with mercy and restraint that breeds something far more valuable. Respect, maybe even fear, but the right kind of fear, the kind that makes an empire think twice before trying this again. Mira nodded slowly, understanding the deeper strategy behind everything that had unfolded over the past several hours. "Begin the evacuation," James ordered. "Let's get this finished properly." Over the following hours, a massive coordinated operation began across the battlefield. Human engineering teams, escorted by armed personnel from Task Force Sentinel, boarded each disabled Threxy vessel one by one. Threxy crew members, confused, frightened, and thoroughly humbled, were guided through an organized evacuation process, moved from their now dead warships into small, simple lifeboats provided by the very species they had come to conquer. Aboard the Dreveth Ascendant, Vel Threxer watched as his own crew prepared for evacuation, gathering what few personal belongings they were permitted to take with them. The ship that had carried him proudly into human space just hours earlier would soon be nothing more than an empty shell stripped of its weapons, its engines, its very purpose. A young human officer approached Vel directly, flanked by two armed guards, though their weapons remained lowered, not raised in threat. "Commander Threxer," the officer said respectfully, "my name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss. I've been assigned to oversee your fleet's evacuation. Your lifeboat is ready whenever you are." Vel studied her for a long moment. There was no cruelty in her expression, no mockery, no triumphant satisfaction at witnessing an enemy's total defeat. Just quiet, professional efficiency. "You are not what I expected," Vel admitted quietly. "What did you expect?" Sarah asked. "Cruelty? Vengeance, a desire to make us suffer for what we attempted here today." Sarah shook her head slowly. "We're not interested in cruelty, Commander. We're interested in making sure something like this never happens again. Destroying your fleet and killing your crews wouldn't accomplish that. It would just create more anger, more hatred, and eventually more war. We'd rather you go home and tell your leadership exactly what really happened here." Vel considered her words carefully as he was guided through the corridors of his own dying ship, toward the evacuation bay where his crew waited nervously beside a small fleet of human-provided lifeboats. As Vel approached the lifeboat assigned to him, he paused, looking back one final time at the massive form of the Dreveth Ascendant, the ship that had served as his command for the past 3 years, now destined to become nothing more than salvaged technology for human engineers to study and repurpose. "Commander," Sarah said, standing beside him, "the lifeboat is ready." Vel nodded, though something in his expression seemed distant, lost in difficult thought. "Sarah," he said quietly, "do you remember what I told you back when this invasion first began? I said bravery does not stop plasma cannons." "I remember, Commander." "I was wrong," Vel admitted, the words difficult but honest. "It was never simply bravery that stopped us today. It was patience, preparation, intelligence, and perhaps most importantly, restraint. Something our own empire has never fully understood." Sarah said nothing, unsure how to respond to her commander's unusually reflective mood. Together they boarded the small lifeboat, joining the rest of their surviving crew for the long journey back toward Threxy space, carrying with them nothing but their lives, their memories, and an important lesson about the true nature of the species they had so completely underestimated. Elsewhere across the battlefield, similar scenes played out aboard every disabled Threxy vessel. Crew after crew, ship after ship, evacuated peacefully into simple supplied lifeboats, escorted respectfully by human personnel who showed no desire for cruelty or unnecessary suffering, only calm professional efficiency in completing their assigned task. By the time the evacuation process was finally complete, over 15,000 Threxy soldiers and officers had been safely relocated from their disabled warships into more than 400 small lifeboats, each one supplied with enough food, water, and basic life support to complete the long journey back toward the edge of Threxy territory. Commander Elena Osei watched the final stages of the operation from Meridian Point's command center, a quiet sense of satisfaction settling over her after the long, tense hours of the battle. "Final evacuation numbers confirmed, Commander. Daniel Reyes reported. 15,231 Threxy personnel safely relocated. 0 confirmed fatalities on either side. Elena nodded, allowing herself a small, tired smile. That's exactly the outcome we hoped for. And the captured fleet? Daniel asked. Admiral Okafor's engineering teams will begin full technology extraction immediately, Elena said. Every weapon system, every piece of advanced technology aboard those ships will be studied thoroughly. Whatever we learn will help us prepare even better for any future encounters with the Threxy Empire, or any other civilization that might consider testing humanity's true strength. Aboard his small, cramped lifeboat surrounded by exhausted, humbled crew members, Vel Threxer watched through a small viewport as Meridian Point and the massive human fleet slowly disappeared behind them, replaced gradually by the empty darkness of open space. Beside him, Sarah sat quietly, staring at nothing in particular, lost in her own thoughts about everything that had happened over the past several hours. What will you tell the Empire, Commander? She finally asked. When we return home, what will you report? Vel considered the question carefully before answering. The truth, he said finally. All of it. Every detail, no matter how difficult it may be for our leadership to accept. They may not believe you, Sarah warned. An entire invasion fleet defeated by a single defense station and a hidden reserve force. Our leadership has always dismissed humanity as insignificant. Convincing them otherwise will not be easy. Then I will make them understand, Vel said firmly. Whether they believe it easily or not, the truth remains the same. Humanity is no longer the primitive, divided species our old reports described. They have grown into something far more disciplined, far more advanced, and far more dangerous than our empire ever anticipated. He paused, looking back one final time toward the direction of Meridian Point, now completely lost from view among the vast darkness of space. And more importantly, he continued quietly, they chose mercy today when they could have easily chosen slaughter instead. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. Not simply that humanity has become powerful, but that they have become powerful while still choosing restraint over cruelty. That is a far more dangerous combination than raw military strength alone. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding the deeper truth behind her commander's words. Weeks later, deep within Threxy territory, Vel Threxer stood before the full council of Threxy Empire leadership, delivering his complete report on the failed invasion of human space. The council chamber was tense, filled with disbelief, anger, and quiet, uncomfortable shock as Vel described in careful detail exactly what had happened to the once proud 7th Invasion Fleet. You are telling us, one council member said slowly, disbelief evident in her voice, that an entire fleet of 300 warships was defeated, without a single fatality, by a species our own records described as barely capable of basic space travel just 40 years ago. That is precisely what I am telling you, Vel confirmed. Our old reports were dangerously outdated. Humanity has spent the past 4 decades preparing, advancing, and waiting. They demonstrated today that they possess both the technological capability and, more importantly, the strategic patience necessary to completely dismantle a full invasion force without unnecessary bloodshed. And they simply let you go? Another council member asked. With nothing but lifeboats? Yes, Vel confirmed. They stripped our fleet of every ship, every weapon, every piece of valuable technology, but they returned every single surviving crew member home alive and unharmed. It was, in its own way, a far more effective punishment than complete destruction would have been. The council chamber fell into a heavy, thoughtful silence as the full weight of Vel's report settled over the assembled leadership. Finally, the Empire's supreme commander, an elderly Threxy named Grand Marshal Kex Vorath, spoke, his voice carrying decades of hard-earned military wisdom. This changes everything, he said slowly. If what you report is accurate, Commander Threxer, then humanity has become far too dangerous an adversary for further military action, at least for the foreseeable future. What do you propose instead, Grand Marshal? Vel asked. Kex considered the question carefully before answering. Diplomacy, he said finally. A species capable of such overwhelming military restraint, even in complete victory, is not simply a threat to be conquered. It is potentially a valuable ally if approached correctly, or a devastating enemy if we continue to underestimate them as we so foolishly did today. The council chamber murmured with quiet agreement, the full weight of humanity's demonstrated power finally settling into the collective understanding of the Threxy Empire's highest leadership. Back on Meridian Point, months after the battle had concluded, Elena Ose stood once again in her command center, reviewing updated intelligence reports about the Threxy Empire's changed diplomatic posture toward human space. "It appears our message was received clearly," she said, reading through the latest reports with quiet satisfaction. "The Threxy Empire has formally requested diplomatic contact, rather than pursuing further military action." Daniel Reyes, standing beside her, smiled slightly. Not bad for a single defense station and a hidden reserve fleet. Elena allowed herself a rare, genuine smile. "We didn't just win a battle today, Daniel. We changed the entire trajectory of humanity's relationship with a major interstellar empire, all without unnecessary loss of life on either side." "Do you think it will last?" Daniel asked. "Lasting peace, I mean, not just a temporary pause before they try again?" Elena considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "That depends on how we continue to conduct ourselves moving forward. Today, we proved that humanity possesses both overwhelming strength and genuine restraint. As long as we continue demonstrating both qualities together, I believe we have a real chance at lasting, respectful peace, not just with the Threxy Empire, but with whatever other civilizations we may eventually encounter among the stars." Far beyond Meridian Point, aboard a small damaged lifeboat drifting quietly through the vast emptiness of space, Commander Vel Threxer sat in contemplative silence, reflecting one final time on everything that had happened during humanity's unexpected, decisive victory. He had entered human space expecting an easy conquest, backed by decades of outdated reports describing a weak, primitive, and insignificant species. He had left with nothing but lifeboats, his once proud fleet completely dismantled, his confidence thoroughly humbled, but his life, and the lives of every soldier under his command, spared through an act of calculated, deliberate mercy that he suspected he would never fully understand. Humanity, it seemed, had grown into something far greater than his empire had ever anticipated, not simply through raw military strength alone, but through the far rarer and more valuable combination of overwhelming power, paired with genuine wisdom and restraint. As his lifeboat continued its long, quiet journey back toward Threxy space, Vel Threxer found himself hoping, for the first time in his long military career, that his own empire's leadership would prove wise enough to learn the same difficult lesson he had learned that day among the stars. That true strength was never measured simply by the ability to conquer. It was measured by the wisdom to know exactly when mercy served a far greater purpose than victory ever could.